Welcome to the HFY Codex Tale. If you like our videos, keep supporting and subscribe to our channel.
The alien girl who refused to speak. The battlefield was quiet now. Smoke still rose from broken machines, and the smell of fire and metal was strong in the air. Sergeant Caleb Walker stepped carefully through the wreckage, holding his rifle tight. His team was gone. He was the only one left. He had heard strange signals from this area, something about a life form. But all he saw were burned-out alien ships and craters in the ground. He was about to turn back, when he heard a sound. It was soft. A whimper. Caleb turned, rifle up, eyes sharp. He followed the sound past a cracked wall, into a half-destroyed bunker. And there, in the corner, he saw her. An alien girl. She sat curled up, arms around her knees, dirt on her face and silver blood on her leg. Her long dark hair hung like a curtain over her face. She looked young, maybe the alien version of 20. She was wearing a torn uniform, clearly not human. But she wasn't holding a weapon. She looked up at him. Her eyes were a strange violet color, glowing faintly in the dim light. But there was no anger in them. No threat. Just fear. Hey, Caleb said slowly, lowering his rifle a little. I'm not going to hurt you. She didn't move. Do you understand me? He asked. No answer. He took a careful step forward. She flinched and pressed herself tighter into the corner. Her breathing got faster, eyes wide like a hunted animal. Caleb stopped. He crouched down so he wouldn't tower over her. I don't know who you are, he said gently, but you're hurt. Let me help. Still, she said nothing. She didn't blink. Did she even speak English? He couldn't tell. But when he reached into his pack and slowly pulled out a small water bottle, her eyes followed it. He set it down and slid it across the floor to her. She didn't touch it. Minutes passed. The wind howled outside. The bunker creaked. Then she did something that made Caleb freeze. She reached out, so slowly it almost looked painful, and grabbed the water bottle. But she didn't drink it. She looked at him, then looked at the bottle, and then pushed it back toward him. What the hell, he whispered. She wanted him to drink it. Was she testing him? Caleb took the bottle and drank a little. She watched him closely, like she was trying to decide something. Finally, her head lowered. She didn't say a word. But she stopped shaking. I'm going to get you out of here, Caleb said. It's not safe. He stood and held out a hand. She didn't move. Caleb sighed and took a step back, giving her space. All right. I'll come back with a med unit, he said. Don't go anywhere. He turned and walked toward the exit. That's when it happened. Something grabbed his wrist. Hard. He turned. The alien girl had moved. She was standing now, unsteady, shaking, but her hand held his wrist tightly. Her eyes locked on his. And still, not a single word. But she didn't let go. Okay, Caleb said, surprised. Okay. You want to come with me? She gave the slightest nod. Barely noticeable. But it was a nod. He wrapped her arm over his shoulder, helping her walk. Her body was cold. Too cold. Like she hadn't had warmth in days. He could feel the metal in her suit pressing against his side. Back at the shelter, Caleb cleaned her wounds and gave her food. She didn't eat much. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just watched him. Like she was waiting for something. Or afraid of something. She didn't sleep that night. Caleb pretended to sleep, but he kept one eye half open. The girl sat in the corner, arms around her knees again, watching the door. The next day, he tried asking her questions. What's your name? No answer. Where are you from? Nothing. Are you a soldier? A runaway? Still nothing. But later that night, when he was cooking a small meal over the heater, he saw her crawl closer. She didn't speak, but she sat beside him. She looked at the fire. Then at him. Then, she placed her hand over her chest, right over her heart, and tapped twice. He didn't understand. Then she did it again. Tap. Tap. And pointed at him. He blinked. Me? She nodded. Tap. Tap. Pointed again. Then, softly, so softly he almost missed it, she whispered one word. Danger. Caleb stared at her. It was the first time she had spoken. And her voice carried fear. Not of him, but of something else. Something coming. The shelter was quiet. Too quiet. Caleb didn't sleep much after the alien girl spoke that one word. Danger. What kind of danger? Was someone coming for her? Or was she the danger? He watched her from across the small room. She sat still, hugging her knees again, staring into the corner like she didn't belong in this world. Her strange violet eyes didn't blink much. Her face looked calm, but her fingers were always moving, like she was trying to hold something in. Caleb got up early, pretending to stretch, but really checking his weapons. He turned to speak, but froze. She was watching him again. And this time, she stood up. She walked slowly to him, barefoot on the cold metal floor. Caleb didn't move. He let her come close. Too close. She looked up at him. Her face was right in front of his chest. Then, without a word, she reached out and gently touched his hand. Caleb flinched. Her fingers were freezing cold, like ice. But he didn't pull away. The moment her skin touched his, something changed. The lights flickered. The heater buzzed like it got a surge of power. And Caleb's chest tightened. Not from pain. From something he couldn't explain. A strange warmth spread from his hand, up his arm, and into his heart. "What are you doing?" he whispered. She didn't answer. Her eyes fluttered shut. Her hand trembled. And suddenly, she gasped and pulled away like she'd touched fire. Then she backed into the corner again. Caleb blinked. What just happened? The girl looked down, breathing hard. She wouldn't look at him. But he saw something new on her face. Shame. Or fear. Later that night, Caleb looked through the small alien scanner he had pulled from the wreck. It was damaged but not dead. When he powered it on, it showed a weak energy reading inside the shelter. The reading was coming from her. She wasn't normal. Not even for an alien. Her body gave off some kind of charge, barely visible, but strange. Not radiation. Not heat. Emotion. The scanner reacted more when she looked at him. Especially when she was near. He realized something. Her body was changing. Because of him. The next day, Caleb sat across from her, trying again. "Why did you touch me?" he asked softly. She didn't answer. "You said danger. Is someone coming? Or is it you?" Still no reply. But this time, she reached out slowly and touched the side of her head, then pointed at him. He didn't understand. Then she whispered, "Noise." He leaned forward. Noise? She closed her eyes, face tight like she was in pain. Too loud, when you feel. It hit him. She could feel his emotions. Maybe even hear his thoughts. Not clearly. But enough to hurt her. That's why she stayed quiet. That's why she backed away. Because the moment she touched his hand, she didn't just feel his skin. She felt everything. His fear. His loneliness. His thoughts of guilt from losing his team. She felt it all, and it scared her. Caleb swallowed hard. You can feel what I feel. She nodded. Just once. And when you touched me. She looked away. It hurt. She didn't answer. But a tear rolled down her cheek. Caleb took a breath. He moved slowly and sat beside her. I didn't mean to scare you, he said. I'm just trying to help. She looked at him, blinking fast like she didn't understand why. And then, she did something no human expected. She placed her hand over his again. Caleb tensed, but didn't move. This time, nothing flickered. No energy. No shock. Only silence. And her soft whisper, not scared now. He looked at her in surprise. You trust me now? She shook her head. I want to. But. Her lips trembled. But what? He asked gently. She looked at him with wide, glowing eyes. You made me feel things I'm not supposed to feel. Then she stood up and walked to the other side of the room. Caleb sat there in silence. He had no idea what she meant. But deep down, he knew one thing. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. Something inside her was waking up. And it had everything to do with him. 3 days passed. The alien girl, he still didn't know her name, spoke only a few words. She stayed close now. Ate when he ate. Sat beside him when the wind howled at night. But something still felt wrong. There was always something in her eyes. Like she was hiding a storm inside. Like she was waiting for something awful to happen. Caleb noticed it most when she looked at the stars. She would stare at them for hours, her face calm, but her hands clenched tight. One night, he asked softly, Is someone coming for you? She didn't look at him. Just whispered, Yes. He tensed. Who? Her voice was cold this time. The ones who built me. Caleb turned slowly. Built, you? She nodded. I was made. Not born. His blood ran cold. You're artificial. She shook her head. Not robot. I'm alive. But made for war. That word. War. It hit him like a punch. She stood and stepped back, like she knew what he was thinking. My mission was Earth. Humans. Destroy. Caleb reached for his sidearm, but didn't draw it. You were sent to kill us? Her lips trembled. Yes. But I stopped. Something broke inside when I saw them dying. I was supposed to finish the job. I didn't. Why? He asked. She looked at him, and this time her eyes were wet again. Because one of you looked at me, and didn't run. Caleb realized something terrifying. She wasn't just a runaway. She was a weapon. A living weapon designed to destroy his kind. And she was still dangerous. Later that night, Caleb sat by the fire, watching her sleep. Her breathing was shaky. She twitched sometimes, like she was dreaming badly. Suddenly, she gasped and sat up, eyes glowing bright. Her skin shimmered faintly, like something beneath it wanted to wake. Nightmare? He asked gently. She didn't answer. Just hugged her knees. Caleb said, You said they made you, like a machine. But you're not one. She whispered, I wasn't supposed to feel. Not like this. They erased emotion. But, something changed. He leaned forward. What changed? Her voice cracked. You. Silence fell. Then she added, I don't know how to stop it. I wasn't made to feel love. But now I feel it, and I don't understand it. Caleb's heart thudded. Are you saying? She looked away, her voice shaking. I think I love you. And that scares me more than death. He didn't know what to say. He had seen friends die. Cities burn. Worlds fall. But nothing prepared him for this. A living weapon. Crying softly in the dark. Saying she loved him. The next morning, Caleb woke to a strange sound. A deep pulse, like something large moving in the sky. He rushed outside. Clouds were parting, pushed by a black ship, sleek, quiet, deadly. The girl stood behind him, her voice hollow. They found me. Caleb grabbed his gun. Can we run? She shook her head. They won't stop. Not until I'm dead. Or I go back. Then we fight, Caleb said. But she stepped forward and said something that shook him. No. You fight, I surrender. He grabbed her arm. No. You can't. She looked into his eyes. If they see you helped me, they'll kill you too. He stared at her. You think I care about that now? Tears filled her eyes. You don't understand. I wasn't just made for war. I was made to lead it. If they take me back, they'll reprogram me. I'll become what I was meant to be. A killer, Caleb whispered. She nodded slowly. And I might be the one to kill you. Then she said the words that chilled him to his core. If you love me back, you have to let me go. The wind outside howled like a warning. Caleb stood near the door, his fists tight. The alien ship was still hovering far above, quiet, watching. They hadn't attacked yet. Inside the shelter, the alien girl sat with her back to the wall, arms wrapped around herself. Her breathing was uneven. She looked smaller now. Not like a weapon. Not like a soldier. Just, lost. Caleb walked toward her slowly. They haven't landed yet. We have time. She didn't answer. I'm not letting them take you, he said. Her voice was quiet, but firm. You don't understand. If I stay, I'll change more. He frowned. Change how? She touched her chest. My heart. It beats now. It never used to. Caleb looked at her, confused. What do you mean? She shook her head. My kind, we don't have hearts like humans. Ours don't beat from emotion. Only function. But now, it races when I look at you. When you touch me. When you speak. She looked up at him, eyes glassy. I feel things I was never built to feel. Caleb knelt in front of her. That's not a bad thing. She swallowed hard. It is for me. My body can't handle emotion. It changes my systems. My blood chemistry. My energy field. I'm breaking from the inside. He stared at her, stunned. You're telling me that, loving me is killing you? She looked away. It's rewiring me. I don't know what I'll become. Later that night, she sat by the window, her face lit by moonlight. Caleb joined her. I used to think emotions made us weak, she said softly. They don't, Caleb replied. She looked at him. Then why does it hurt? He didn't answer. She held her hand out. Touch me. He hesitated, but placed his palm gently over hers. At once, her skin lit up faintly. Soft pulses of light moved under the surface, like tiny stars flowing through her veins. Her breath hitched. Her eyes closed. And then, her heart beat loudly. Thump. Thump. She gasped and grabbed her chest. It's too fast. Caleb pulled back, alarmed. Are you okay? She nodded quickly. Yes, but I don't know what this means. No one's ever felt this before. He sat beside her. Then let's find out together. She stared at him. You'd risk everything, just to feel this with me. He gave a small smile. You already did. The next morning, she didn't wake up. Caleb panicked. Her skin was colder than usual. Her breathing was shallow. Then, suddenly, her body glowed. A low hum filled the room. Her heart raced beneath her skin, shaking her chest. She opened her eyes, terrified. I can't stop it, she whispered. Being near you makes it stronger. He touched her shoulder. Then don't fight it. Let it happen. Tears slid down her cheeks. I'm scared, Caleb. I know, he whispered. But you're not alone. She looked at him with so much fear, and so much love, that it made his own chest tighten. Then she whispered, hold me. He wrapped his arms around her gently. And for the first time since she arrived, she let herself cry. Soft, silent tears soaked his shoulder. Her hands trembled. Her heart kept beating. Too fast. Too human. That night, she woke from a dream. She saw herself in a dark room. Wires in her back. Scientists watching. Her eyes empty. Her voice dead. Then a voice broke through the cold. I love you. She opened her eyes in real life, and saw Caleb asleep beside her, breathing slow. She touched his face. Watched him sleep. Then whispered, you broke the weapon they made. And now? I'm becoming something else. She sat in silence for a long time. Then placed a soft kiss on his hand. And said, almost too quietly to hear. If I die because of this, it will be worth it. The morning was quiet. Too quiet. Caleb stretched his arms, expecting to feel her next to him. But his hand touched empty blankets. He sat up fast. She was gone. The shelter's door was wide open. Cold wind rushed in. Her boots were missing. So was the energy scanner. And the blanket he gave her. Caleb's heart dropped. No. He ran outside, calling her name, though he still didn't know what it was. Where are you? Snow had started falling again. Her tracks led into the woods, barely visible in the white dust. Caleb followed them without thinking. Branches scraped his arms. The cold cut his skin. But none of it mattered. She was out there. Alone. Leaving him behind. He found her standing at the edge of the valley, near the old signal tower. Her back was to him. The wind blew through her hair. She didn't turn around. I told myself I wouldn't cry, she said softly. You shouldn't be out here, he said. You're still weak. I'm stronger when you're not near. He paused. You're lying. She didn't argue. He stepped closer. Why did you leave? Her voice trembled. Because I'm breaking, Caleb. Every time I feel something for you, I lose control. My systems overload. My mind fractures. Then we find a way to fix it, he said. She shook her head. There is no fix. I wasn't built for love. He walked around to face her. Her eyes were red. Her lips trembled. I'm not afraid to die, she whispered. But I'm afraid to hurt you. You won't, he said. How can you be sure? Because you already had the chance to destroy me, and you didn't. She looked at the old signal tower behind her. It's still active, she said. If I send out a message, they'll take me back. I can stop the war if I go willingly. Caleb's eyes narrowed. You'd sacrifice yourself? She nodded. Maybe they'll spare Earth. Maybe they'll erase my feelings. Erase you from my mind. He stepped closer, his voice firm. And what if they don't? What if they turn you back into a weapon? What if they use you to finish the job? She looked down. I'd rather die than be that again. She reached into her pocket and held something out. It was a small memory chip. My thoughts. My dreams. The feelings I had for you, she said. If they erase me, this will be the only proof I ever felt love. Caleb didn't take it. Instead, he stepped forward and gently pulled her into his arms. You don't need to give me proof, he whispered. You're not a memory. You're still here. You're still you. She sobbed softly. I can't promise I won't lose control again. Then lose it with me. He held her tight. She shook in his arms, caught between fear and love. Finally, she pulled back. I almost left forever, she whispered. I told myself it was the right thing. But when I reached the signal tower, my heart. She placed his hand over her chest. It wouldn't let me press send. They walked back to the shelter slowly. That night, she lay beside him with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. When this started, she said, I didn't understand why you mattered. And now, he asked. Now I know I was never alive before I met you. Far above, in orbit, the black ship waited. It had not moved. It had not spoken. But inside, something stirred. Her creators had found her signal trail. They knew she had changed. And they were coming, not to save her, but to erase her. The sky turned dark before sunrise. Not from clouds. From shadows. From ships. Caleb stood outside the shelter, rifle in hand, staring up at the sky as 3 black vessels moved slowly through the clouds. Silent. Watching. Behind him, the alien girl stepped out. Her face had no expression, but her eyes were full of pain. They're here, she said. He nodded. I see them. They won't talk, she whispered. They'll just take me. Or kill you. Maybe both. Caleb looked at her. Then we don't give them a choice. The first strike came without warning. A beam of violet light blasted through the treetops, burning a trench into the snow beside the shelter. Caleb dove, pulling her down with him. Run, he shouted. But she didn't move. Her skin began to glow, brighter than before. Don't, he warned. You said it hurts you to use your powers. She looked at him, voice cold now. They'll hurt you if I don't. She stepped forward, lifting her hand. A glowing wave of energy exploded from her fingers, hitting the side of one ship. It didn't fall, but it staggered. They'll send down hunters next, she said. Caleb's blood ran cold. Within minutes, they landed. Tall figures in dark armor stepped from the ship, silent, faceless, like ghosts. They moved fast. Efficient. No words. No mercy. The girl stood in front of Caleb, breathing hard. One of the hunters stepped forward and raised a black rod. You are broken, the voice said. Not human. Not kind. You feel things, it continued. You are no longer useful. Prepare for termination. She stood her ground. You'll have to go through me. Confirmed, the voice replied. The blast came fast, like lightning, but Caleb shoved her aside just in time. The energy beam struck his shoulder. He dropped to one knee, gritting his teeth. She screamed. Her hands lit up again, but this time, they didn't shake. She stood over him and unleashed a blast so powerful it cracked the snow and knocked the nearest hunter off his feet. Caleb blinked. You said using your powers would destroy you. She didn't look at him. I said love would change me. Her skin began to shift, glowing lines running up her arms, across her face. Her eyes were brighter than the sun. I'm not a weapon anymore, she whispered. I'm something new. The hunters regrouped. But they looked, unsure. She stepped forward, raising her arms. I choose my own path, she shouted. I choose him. A shockwave burst from her chest, pushing the hunters back. Then she fell. Caleb caught her before she hit the ground. Her body was hot, burning up from inside. Stay with me, he begged. You're not done yet. She looked up at him with a weak smile. I changed for you, she whispered. Now they don't understand me. Now they're afraid. Behind them, one ship pulled back. Then another. The hunters froze. And slowly, silently, they retreated. Caleb carried her back to the shelter. She was barely conscious. Her skin dim now. Fading. He laid her down and held her close, pressing his forehead to hers. You saved me, he whispered. No, she breathed. You saved me. The day you gave me water. The day you didn't pull away when I touched you. Her hand gripped his. I'm scared, Caleb. I don't want to fade. You won't, he said. You hear me? You won't. But deep inside, he felt her slipping. And her last words before sleep took her were. Promise me, if I disappear, you'll remember who I tried to become. Outside, the sky cleared. The ships were gone. But the girl who once came from war now lay silent, caught between death and something entirely unknown. She didn't move for 2 days. Caleb stayed by her side the entire time. He didn't eat. He barely slept. He just held her hand and whispered things he hoped she could still hear. You're stronger than anything I've ever known. You changed me too. You made me believe in something again. Her body stayed warm, but her glow had faded. The strange energy lines across her skin were dim now, like stars fading at dawn. Was she still in there? Or had she already gone? On the third morning, as snow fell lightly outside the shelter, her fingers twitched. Caleb jumped up. Hey! Hey, can you hear me? Her lips moved slightly. A whisper. He leaned in close. Cold. He grabbed a blanket, wrapped it around her, pulled her into his arms. You're okay. I'm here. Her eyes blinked open, slow, weak, but they found his face. Still, here, she whispered. He nodded quickly. I never left. She smiled faintly. Then tears filled her eyes. I thought I was dying, she said. You were, he said softly. But you didn't. She shook her head. Maybe I did, just a little. She sat up slowly, leaning on his shoulder. I feel different, she whispered. Like something inside me broke, and something new grew in its place. He held her hand. Is that bad? She shook her head. No. It's just, not what I was made for. He gave a soft laugh. Then I guess you're not what you were made for anymore. She looked at him with eyes full of wonder and fear. I don't know what I am now. I'm not a weapon. Not their tool. But I'm also not like you. He leaned closer. That doesn't matter. She touched his chest, feeling his heartbeat. Yours still sounds like music to me. Then she touched her own chest. And mine, it still beats because of you. Hours later, the shelter grew quiet again. She asked him to sit beside her. Close. She took a deep breath. Then said the words she'd been holding back since the day they met. I love you. Her voice trembled. Her hands shook. But I'm scared. Why? He asked gently. She looked down. Because I don't know how to be in love. I don't know what happens next. What if I hurt you? What if I lose control again? Caleb smiled. Then we figure it out together. No one knows what happens next. That's what makes it real. She looked at him with wet eyes. And then. She cried. Not from pain. Not from fear. But from the overwhelming weight of emotion, something her creators had tried to erase from her. Now, it flowed freely. Tears ran down her cheeks as she leaned into his arms. "You made me fall in love, human," she whispered. "And now I'm scared of how much I need you." He held her tighter. And whispered back. "Good. That means it's real." That night, she didn't glow. She didn't float. She didn't fight. She just lay in his arms like a person who had finally found home. Weeks passed. She got stronger. Laughed sometimes. Even teased him. He built a quiet life away from the war. A place where no one could find them. A place just for the two of them. She still had scars. So did he. But they healed, together. And though she would always be something not quite human, she had learned something no lab, no war, no machine could give. The power of love.